There are 1.25 million species of animals, and all of them emit behavior. Psychology is the science of that behavior. This film describes some of the ways psychologists conduct a science of behavior, how they go about finding basic laws that describe different kinds of behavior in different species. Although we are interested in describing behavior in a natural environment, there are certain advantages to working in a laboratory. Not only can we control many important variables, but our subjects are available when we need them. Since we are interested in finding general laws of behavior, there are many cases when the particular response does not matter. For much of this film, we will study a simple response, such as pecking by a pigeon or lever pressing by a rat. After examining the basic principles of behavior theory with rats and pigeons within the confines of the laboratory, we shall extend our findings to a variety of species. And we shall progress from single responses to sequences of behavior. Psychologists and biologists have constructed many different models of behavior. For the sake of consistency, we shall describe only one of them, the model of behavior theory associated with B.F. Skinner. It is our belief that a systematic study of behavior within the framework of a single model is more valuable than one that skips from model to model in order to describe different kinds of behavior. Only time will test the adequacy of a model. Meanwhile, we can feel confident with Sir Francis Bacon that truth arises more readily from error than from confusion. Behavior can be classified into two main categories, respondent and operant. In respondent behavior, a response such as salivation is elicited by a stimulus. The relation between the response and the eliciting stimulus is called a reflex. The classical paradigm for respondent behavior shows that an unconditioned stimulus elicits a response. Meat powder in the mouth is an unconditioned stimulus that elicits salivation in a dog. This dog is salivating to food. As Pavlov discovered at the turn of the century, respondent behavior can be conditioned. If another stimulus, such as a bell, is paired with meat powder, eventually a new reflex is formed, and the bell alone elicits salivation. The new reflex is called a conditioned reflex. The new stimulus is called a conditioned stimulus, because it was conditioned to elicit the response. The sound of dog biscuits being rattled in the box has become a conditioned stimulus for salivation. The begging instinct in young robins consists of several reflexes: the gaping mouth, the distinctive cry, and the flapping wings. These reflexes are normally elicited when the parent bird lands at the nest. Another adequate stimulus is dangling a worm above the bird's head. A worm in the hand is not an adequate stimulus. The child's behavior in feeding the robin is not respondent behavior, it is operant behavior. In operant behavior, there is no eliciting stimulus. Operant behavior is emitted, and it usually occurs at some strength prior to any known conditioning. The strength, or rate, of a response prior to any known conditioning is called the operant level of that response. Raccoons have a high operant level for manipulating objects. Even though there is no eliciting stimulus, operant behavior may be brought under the control of different classes of stimuli. One kind of stimulus that controls behavior is called a reinforcer. A reinforcer is defined as a stimulus that increases or maintains the strength of a response above operant level. The important thing about a reinforcer is that it is defined only in terms of its effect on behavior. Before we can say that applesauce is a reinforcer for this monkey, we have to show that applesauce increases the strength of some response above its operant level. For example, we might give the monkey applesauce only when he swings on the trapeze. Then, if the rate of trapeze swinging increases, we can say that applesauce is a reinforcer. It is important to remember that the reinforcing properties do not lie in the applesauce, but in its effect upon behavior. A reinforcing stimulus need not be related to a biological necessity. This 9-year-old dog has acquired a large repertoire of responses that result in having a person throw a stick that she then retrieves. Here, throwing the stick is made contingent upon the dog's sitting. Since sitting behavior occurs far above operant level, we can say that throwing the stick is a reinforcer.
Good dog.
This is a non-biological reinforcer occasionally encountered by students. The operant repertoire of most animals is very large. This mouse, for example, climbs over and under and through objects. However, not all responses are equally suitable for basic research in operant behavior. A good operant for basic research is one that can be performed quickly, repeatedly, and without much physical expenditure of energy. We shall be using the rate at which a response occurs as a measure of the strength of that response. This being so, it is convenient to have a response that is discrete, like lever pressing, rather than one that is continuous. A good response for basic research must be easy to define and measure. For convenience and precision, the response we elect to study in the laboratory is usually defined electromechanically. For a response to occur, the lever must be depressed far enough to operate this microswitch. There is no subjectivity on the part of the observer. The laboratory response usually studied in pigeons is the pecking of a small disc or key on the side of the bird's cage. The response key is a plastic paddle that is mounted back of the opening. When the bird pecks through the opening, the key is deflected and operates a microswitch. Like lever pressing, pecking the key is defined electromechanically. The advantages of the pecking response for research can be seen when we realize that a pigeon can maintain a rate of 4,000 or 5,000 responses per hour for as long as 15 hours, or he can respond at a lower rate for weeks at a time. Lever pressing and pecking can be automatically recorded by an instrument such as a cumulative recorder. This outsized cumulative recorder was designed for classroom demonstrations. It consists of a drum and of a marking pen. A horizontal line indicates the passage of time. A vertical excursion of the pen indicates that a response has been emitted. The responses are occurring more and more frequently. The rate of response is increasing. With a little practice, the experimenter can estimate the rate of response over any part of the record, and he can predict the course of the behavior as it unfolds before him. The great advantage of a cumulative record is that all of this can be accomplished while the behavior is in progress. Since the pen moves up a constant amount with each response, it is possible to measure the number of responses that have been emitted over all or any part of the cumulative record. And since the drum turns at a constant speed, it is possible to measure the amount of time that has elapsed. As our first example of operant conditioning, we will train a pigeon to peck during. Food is an effective reinforcer for pigeons when they are reduced to approximately 80% of their free-feeding weight. When a bird arrives in the laboratory, he is given free access to food and water, and weighed daily to determine this free-feeding or ad libitum weight. He is then gradually reduced to 80% of this weight by being fed a small amount every day. Once motivation is present, the first rule for teaching anything to any animal is to structure the situation so that the behavior is likely to occur. The pigeon is placed alone in a small empty box, which eliminates such incompatible behavior as nest building or flying away. The box contains two openings. the response key, and the opening to the food magazine. Pecking the key turns out the key light and operates the feeder. The feeder light comes on and the feeder is raised so that the bird can reach the grain. When the circuit is broken, the feeder is lowered out of reach. Before conditioning can begin, adaptation and magazine training must take place. One way to facilitate adaptation to the box is to place food on the floor, especially in the region of the feeder. Magazine training means adapting the bird to the food magazine. Since food is to be the reinforcer, it is imperative that the bird be accustomed to eating from the feeder. When the feeder is raised for the first time, the bird usually startles and jumps back. For most pigeons, the initial operation of the feeder is aversive rather than reinforcing. Eventually, however, the bird approaches the feeder and eats from it. Magazine training is continued until the bird approaches the feeder from any part of the box as soon as the feeder is raised. Since the operant level for a pigeon pecking a key is, for all practical purposes, 0, we will not wait for a response to occur so that we can reinforce it. We will shape the pecking response. Shaping consists of reinforcing closer and closer approximations of the response we wish to condition. First, we reinforce any behavior that brings the bird to the end of the box near the key. We then reinforce movements that bring his beak near the key. His head a little closer to the key. And again. When we demand a little more, he turns away, so we reinforce his return to the right end of the box and a motion toward the key. This preliminary behavior is order. That will be a record of pecking behavior only. Here the experimenter will try to reinforce a pecking motion toward the key, but will actually reinforce turning a circle. His left foot is beginning to turn. The behavior that is reinforced is the behavior that immediately precedes reinforcement. Another motion toward the key. And he pecks the panel just above the feeder. Now he moves his body forward toward the key. But when we raise the criterion, we lose him again, so we reinforce a movement of the head and earlier approximations where his head is near the key. Some minutes have passed. He has been coming very close to the key. A pecking motion toward the key. We wait. And he pecks the panel. And again. He made no closer approximations for several minutes. And even now, after the first few responses, pecking the key is not established, and we continue to shape. He pecks the edge of the key, but this does not operate the microswitch. We reinforce approximations until the next pecking response, when he responds several times in succession. Pecking is erratic at first, but the response is now firmly established. The quickest way to strengthen behavior is to reinforce every response. The reinforcement of every response is called continuous reinforcement, or CRF. Strictly speaking, this bird is not receiving CRF because he pecks more than once before lowering his head to the feeder. Continuous reinforcement produces a steady rate of response in a short period of time. It is not, however, the most economical way to maintain behavior. And, unless a very small amount of food is given each time, the animal may become satiated after as few as 50 or 60 responses. After a response has been conditioned, if the reinforcement is withheld, the response eventually declines in strength. This decrease in response strength, when reinforcement is discontinued, is called extinction. When reinforcement has been continuous, extinction takes place fairly rapidly, and relatively few responses are emitted. Extinction following continuous reinforcement consists of bursts of responses interspersed with plateaus of no responding. Frequently, there is emotional behavior, such as flapping wings. These characteristics of extinction after CRF, including emotional behavior, have been found to obtain from many species of animals, including human children and adults. During the course of the film, we will demonstrate the basic principles of behavior theory with different animals and in different situations. Whenever we are describing conditioning, we will follow the same procedure, even though the order or the emphasis may change with a particular behavior being conditioned. Before he does anything else, the experimenter or the animal trainer or the teacher must decide exactly what behavior he wants to establish and how it will be defined and measured. He then usually measures the operant level of this behavior. The final performance tells him precisely where he's going. The operant level tells him where he must start. He selects a reinforcer and, if necessary, deprives the animal to be sure that the reinforcer will function as such. In the laboratory, it is usually the apparatus that structures the situation so that the desired behavior is likely to occur and incompatible behavior is unlikely or impossible. The animal must be adapted to the experimental apparatus or to any other features of the situation that may be unfamiliar. If the operant level of the desired behavior is very low, the experimenter begins by reinforcing a response that is already in the animal's repertoire. Presenting food when the bird turns his head toward the key increases the probability that he will make some other movement in the direction of the key. Shaping consists of reinforcing successive approximations of the behavior to be conditioned.